If you think you know, great, but you have simple places to take a look to say, okay, do I really know? And oh, I didn't know that. And that'll be between us. So that's what's in there, but there are some forms in there for you to consider using or check against the ones you are using. There's a federal form for FMLA. You can use that in California. The only risk in using it is that you should put something in there that has a statement like these forms do that say that there's no requirement for the physician to disclose the medical condition. Because the privacy laws in California say, if the employee wants to tell us, that's up to them. We're not supposed to ask. And we're supposed to be based on what can they do and what can't they do. It's really about their ability and have a physician to say, yeah, this is what they can and can't do. All right. You're going to go through what kind of leave applies, how much time. Is it something like FMLA and CFRA where the employees use part of that time already within the year that your company counts? As an aside, you know that in your policies, you should be saying how you count your FMLA, CFRA year, right? Okay, most people know that. Okay. Provide the employee with the written designation notice, like you said. It says, there's lots of words there, but it says, here's the deal. Now, I think it is wise and protective for everybody that goes out for a medical reason to require them as a condition of return to work to get another certification from their healthcare provider. Now, some companies, it's just more paperwork and I don't want to bother with it. I think what that does is it gives you the ability to evaluate who's coming back. And it may trigger an interactive conversation. It gives you a heads up on that. Or their own physician may say they really can't do much. So how often does this happen? You have a worker who's been out on unpaid leave. They've been through their paid leave accumulations. State disability insurance only pays so much. Maybe you don't have STD or LTD in your company, and they just they can't afford to be out anymore. But they're really not ready to come back to work. If the physician doesn't certify that they're ready to come to work, or that says they can't do much, you really want that piece of paper to be able to say, no, I'm not going to return you to work because you can't perform the essential functions of the job. And so it can be protective in not returning somebody to work in some instances. And I know I come from a place that everybody's goal is if you want people healthy and back to work and productive as they had been, assuming that's who they were. So that I think is important. And in the FMLA and CFRA world, if you're only looking at that leave, I realize there's so many, but if you're only looking at that, you have to not only put notice to the employee, as we said, that you're counting the leave, but you have to tell them ahead of time that return to work fitness for duty certification will be required before they're evaluated for return. If you don't tell them that at least for FMLA and CFRA purposes, you can't put it up as a barrier later on. Now, I don't see that trouble spot coming up much as a practical matter, but sooner or later that's going to come up. And that some company who I know or a new client will have put up that barrier and said, no, you can't return to work. And they're going to have counsel and they're going to say, you didn't give the notice that said return to work was required, and they're going to start cobbling together a claim with that as its foundation and expanding it in some way. Okay. provide notices and brochures required for some leaves. There's all kinds of brochures that the state has. It's hard to keep up on all that. Again, sorry for mentioning California Chamber of Commerce. The easiest way to comply with your notices and your posters requirement is find a service like them, get them sent to you every year. They're, you pay them to figure that out for you, and you don't have to figure out which poster is required and which isn't. You've hired them, you rely on them. I haven't seen or heard of them making a mistake. It's just an easy way to go. Or some other comparable service. But it's the brochures. A lot of companies don't remember to give all the brochures, and it's not a big claim risk, I don't think. But still, you'd like to comply if you can. Check in with the employee when a leave of absence is nearing completion. Do you all do that? Okay. Are there some times where you don't really want to know what they're up to and hoping they're never going to come back and you might not check? I know, nobody would admit that, but that happens sometimes. But it's good practice to check in with them, so it's the right thing to do, the right way to manage and administer your people. But also, let's say there's a dispute. I love when there's a great record that the company has done the right thing, gone a little bit beyond where possible, and checked in from time to time to see how the worker is doing. And it's just a great record to have, particularly.
That is a good, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
So that is a good policy to check, because I've heard different, where they say when someone's on leave or on disability, you don't disturb them, you don't interrupt them, you don't contact them. So you're saying that it's good to occasionally,
I think when you're coming up near the end,
okay.
I think it's good to check in, not to invade their world, but to keep a light check-in. Your return to work date is coming up. Just want to remind you, these are the things we need to evaluate that. I hope you're doing well. That should be limited to that. You're really not looking to get into a whole conversation about exactly how they're doing and exactly what is what. And if it turns out that they are not ready to come back to work, then you would say, well, we would need another certification from your medical provider, and we'll evaluate your request. Because you need to see it.
COBRA notice shortly.
Could be, yes.
So what if that continues and they're already on COBRA, but the notes, you need to check in, oh, they are due back in a week, let me check in, oh, then they get another note, and then another note, and another note, and how, I know you're never supposed to terminate somebody on a leave, but how long does that go on before you're like, okay, they're not coming back?
So this is a problem everybody's had, right? So there's no fine line of a law that says. I think when somebody is out for, it's going to sound extreme, but if somebody's out for a year, which happens, you might look more seriously at that. I think as a general rule, it's always better, and you know this, it's better to wait out the person. You might have a discipline issue pending. You might have all kinds of things that you've learned. The circumstances in the employer may have changed. You might have had all kinds of changes. But it's usually best to wait them out. And other than, just say it in a funny way, the irritation that like this person's on your payroll and for what? But at some point, they're not costing you anything by being away. And
once you have them on COBRA, that's the ticket. I usually add the 30 days personal leave on top of all the other leaves when I'm sure I've exhausted everything. And then I let them know at that time, if you're not going to return and you're not going to communicate, then I'm going to assume you've abandoned, and then I do the job abandonment letters.
Well, and that's if somebody's not communicating. Yeah. And I think that if somebody's not communicating or responding and they're out of time, for whatever has been granted. That is a different situation, but I think it's, again, I want to have a good record, and so whether it's email and regular mail, it's however the best record you can make without making it look irritating, but a good record of saying, we've been unable to reach you, we're concerned about you, want to let you know that your leave is expired. If you want to request further leave, here's what you need to do. I'd send a second letter. Once you're out of the, and I would spread it a week or so apart. Give them time, because there are situations where somebody, there's something really troubling in their life, and it's real, and we can't possibly know. But all we do have control over is having a series of attempts to do the right thing. I always want to be able to say my client did everything they could to do the right thing.
But if you're going 2, 3, 4 years and they keep giving notes.
Yeah, I think after a year, unless it's something like really serious or like a workers' comp. Workers' comp, we've got a hypo on a workers' comp. Workers' comp, it's another animal, and it they can seemingly go on forever, and part of that is baked into the system. There's the claimant side and the court side and the defense. It's a very slow system, and so. But if you're going more than a year, then I think you should be talking to your counsel to map out what your next steps are. Yes, ma'am.
I work for the police credit union, and we do everything above and beyond the letter of the law and are very generous. But what I found in the past few years is what I like to call the frequent flyers of the leave of absence journey. And when you put them on leave, they know more than you do. And they're the ones that wind up being out a couple of years. And we have the hardest time convincing the managers and VPs that counsel tells us just leave them alone. They're not costing you anything.
Right.
And I know myself, I want that folder off my desk. I want it closed. But you know what? It will eventually close. I can tell you that firsthand. It is frustrating. I mean, the gal that has the baby, that you see her in the high heels carrying the baby, and now some chiropractor says she has a back problem, and you can't do anything. You just have to go, I'm so sorry, it hurt, and it's really, I always call it the Academy Award performance. You have to pretend that you really care about their back, you know what I mean? But that's a part of the whole gig, and I was shocked when I learned how much more they knew than I did, and I can't tell you how many of these I have attended, and there has never been 2 leave of absences the same, ever. Ever. So
Right.
it's really interesting.
So there's sometimes it feels like somebody's working the system, and sometimes they actually are working the system, right? Right? There's two. There's two, and some managers are wired to think everybody's trying to cheat, and so you need to be vigilant about your internal managers so they don't stub your toe, right? But then there are folks that they've got a reason and another reason and another reason, and the resources and time that it takes to prove the fraud, if it is a fraud, it's a long road, and so few companies are truly willing to invest the resources to prove the fraud, take the claim risk, and fight it, win, lose, or draw, to send the message throughout the company. It's because it's an expensive process. Some of it might be insured, for the claim. Yeah. So, okay, let's move ahead. So you all know this. Centralize the process in a trained HR person or manager. You really hope your line managers are not winging it. And you want to train your supervisors to recognize leave issues. And so there's in some of these laws, there's the concept that it's the employer's job particularly in CFRA and FMLA. You know, there's the most regulation right in there. I mean, we've been kind of light on it today because it's just not possible to pack it all into this length of program. But that you have, and even for FEHA and ADA accommodation purposes, the employer has some obligation to reach out to an employee who appears to need an accommodation. And it's a tangle because the law is pretty clear that you can't accommodate something that you don't know about, but yet at the same time you're supposed to be vigilant and, you know, read the tea leaves. So there's a bit of a conflict there, but you want to recognize your supervisors to at least come to whoever it is in the company who's the most knowledgeable, either themselves or they have the link with outside HR or outside counsel, to say there's something not quite right here. And often it comes up in the context because there's a potential discipline emerging. There's a lot of absenteeism, the person's spacey. There's all sorts of reasons that you might recognize the need, and there's a delicate balance and finesse in how you manage those discipline situations, because you want to give, ideally you want to give the employee, create the circumstances where the employee can identify what that issue is if they blame their performance issue on a disability of some kind, because then you need to move on a dual track. What do you do with the discipline, and how do you go forward with the interactive process? Okay. Speaking of interactive process, Allison's been out for 9 weeks. Our medical leave policy only permits 8 weeks. I can't imagine she's going to be able to come back soon and actually be any good at her job. You've heard, none of you have done this, but I'm assuming, but you've heard this before. How often do people recover from a case of bipolar disorder requiring hospitalization? Let's just tell her that she's out of time and we'll have to let her go. Okay, so you all know that this is a disaster waiting to happen. Again, we mentioned earlier, don't be the doctor. Don't assume too much, okay? Even before we come into some of the disability issues, you're going to default on, I've got my process, okay? And you've got to deal with your managers and say, we've got a process. We're not going to create a risk for ourselves. We're going to do by the book and do the right thing. This person's out already, so you're out of leave, they're out of time, you're going to want another medical certification form, you're going to give them a written response to what they're eligible for, but you don't, you just can't. Okay, good. Correct answer. You know this already. I just had to have a couple bullets here. The California law defines disability very broadly. If you probably have desk materials, or if you looked online at the regulations, which are easy to find, you either know or would be shocked just how much is determined to be a disability. And it's almost hard to figure out an instance where it's not going to be a disability, because it has to, somebody needs to be limited under the state law. Federal, it says substantially limited, but we already said that you have to follow the rule that benefits the employee most. So that's why we're not always, federal's not really top of mind here. Limited in one or more major life activities. And major life activities are, walking, eating, breathing, these are, they're important to me and they're important to all of our workers, but it's very broad, and of course it's physical and mental disabilities. And physical, because we can see them, I think it's a little easier for companies to be, to think they can evaluate and be empathetic. And this is, the mental disabilities, they're difficult for everybody to try to figure out, because we all have our preconceived notions of what is and what isn't. And I think in my own Actually, it was just a great education. So most all my work is for employers, you know that. Every once in a while, I'll represent an executive who's on their way in or out or hasn't. You know this, ongoing employer duty to reasonably accommodate a qualified individual with disability. It can include leaves of absences and intermittent leaves. Two things. It's an ongoing obligation. So sometimes you've done it once and you set the plan and it's done. But things evolve, people change over time. It's an ongoing process. So there may be another interactive discussion that's needed later on because there's a further or continued request for accommodation that comes up. So the exception is there's an undue hardship on the employer, and it's really hard to find a legally defensible undue hardship defense. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there's a difference between it sounds expensive and time-consuming and all that. There's a difference between that and something that actually imposes a hardship on a company. And whether it's the government or the courts, it's a high bar. You're going to talk about it in some instances and consider it, but it's really a high bar. Still a high bar, but sometimes a little easier in some situations which are not pleasant, is that where the worker is a direct threat to the health and safety of themselves or others. And those are in the difficult situations where there's truly a risk, some sort of physical safety issue, something that gets you there. It's not something that you can just say, oh, the person was out on bipolar, and so I think they could be a risk. It needs to be more than that. There needs to be some evidence that they've done something at work, or you're aware and you can establish that they've done something outside of work that has put themselves at risk or somebody else. So it's possible, still a high bar. Interactive process, exchange of essential information without delay or obstruction. Those are fancy words for get to it. Because without delay or obstruction, you might say, well, this is on the employer side, yeah, okay, I have to do it promptly and all that. But this is also an obligation of the employee. They don't. The rule would be that they need to participate in the interactive process and be engaged in that, or else they can hardly complain about what you've decided to do. If the employee is not cooperating or what have you, you need to document that in a way. Could be an email or something of that nature, and when you are doing that, I suggest that your communications when you're documenting something to an employee be firm but conversational. I just would like to confirm this. We asked you to do this. You've not been available. We really want to have the opportunity to have an interactive conversation with you so we can understand your situation better and see if there's a reasonable accommodation that works for both of us. Something like that is the right thing to do in the moment. And then how does that look later on when something has fallen apart? Because in the litigation, everybody goes to the documents first. Like the story begins to be told from all the communications in the documents, and then you get to what do people say about them. So did I cover, or do you have another question?
I just, when I've done the interactive process with employees, I always like to ask them, what do you think would be a reasonable accommodation
Yep.
for us to provide you?
Right.
Rather than me always coming and saying, well, we can do this and this and this.
Right. I think that's a great question, or for us to consider. So that's a great way to launch that. Again, initiate the process when as notice of the need. We talked about that. Be open-minded. We talked about that. Don't think you know better than the doctor. Know your facts. Not required to reveal the diagnosis. We touched on that. And the leaves required by the disability laws can be longer than whatever the statutory ones. You know that. Bill has been on workers' comp leave for 5 months. His FMLA leave is gone, and we need to move on. And the workers' comp insurer denied the claim. Can we let him go? All right, this is a softball question.
The claim was denied.
Okay, so this is a common thing that comes up. So in the workers' comp world, so you know when somebody says I've been injured on the job, whether you think it's nonsense, I want to use a more colorful word, but if you think it's nonsense, or you just, gee, this really happened, regardless of that, you know you've got to give them the form. I know it seems like the wrong thing to invite somebody to make a claim, but that's what you need to do, and it's better that they get into the workers' comp world and not think first about the civil world, and hopefully it stays there. But what happens is that goes through a process, the claim goes in, the carriers usually, I don't want to say always, but it seems like they routinely deny the claim. And then it's up to the employee, who's called the applicant in that world. They appeal, and that's what the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board is, and that's where the litigation happens. So in most cases, there's a claim denial, and there's an appeal, and then the litigation happens, and then some resolution. So the claim denial by the workers' comp insurer, I don't want to say it's meaningless, but it's not relevant, I think, for what we're going to do. Now, if they've denied the claim and the carrier calls you up and says they never, they didn't file their appeal within time, then maybe that's relevant. So I think you know from our conversation already that that your gut would tell you that, okay, he's got a pending workers' comp matter. It's going to be resolved there. I'm not going to do anything. They're on workers' comp leave. There's no interactive process. There's nothing for you to do. Let it run its course. If you let him go, I'll come back to it in a minute. If you let him go, there can be some consequences. So the second one, I added this last night. Robin, now out on workers' comp leave, asked to return to her sales and customer support job in a home fabrics business, but to be assigned to light duty as she is unable to lift anything over 5 pounds or operate a computer. So because we're short on time and I want to get to a couple others. So this happened at a client recently. I changed it a little bit. But you're not required to create a job that doesn't exist. Sort of across the board in all the accommodations. You can try, you can do it if you want to, but you don't have to create a job that doesn't exist. So in this instance, if you can imagine where there's big bolts of fabric and customers come in and you need to be able to lift more than 5 pounds, and there's a lot of work of the computer. So in this instance, the employer said, no, I don't have light duty work for you because I don't have to give you a job that doesn't exist and you can't do your job. And the employee, they weren't really troubled by it, but that's what happened there. Workers' comp, so one of the reasons not to terminate somebody that's on workers' comp leave, so there's this labor code section that's an anti-retaliation law, and not only do they get every benefit of the doubt, but when they make that claim, it's not covered by your workers' comp insurance. So what that means is that you're going to have to get your company's counsel to be involved in that part of the claim. Now, most of these are kind of knee-jerk claims because they'll come up with something and they tend to go away and it's not very expensive with the outside counsel. But if you terminate somebody, you're going to get one of those and you're going to have to pay to defend it. And that's no fun if you're paying. We talked about those. Health insurance can end if it's consistent with your other medical leave and company policy. Okay? There's nothing in the workers' comp law that says you have to keep that going, but you have to think about your other leaves and what would run concurrently with that. I think we talked about this. The person's out on some sort of disability leave, and they haven't paid their part of the insurance premiums. Can't fire them, can't cancel the coverage. That'd be a problem. Mark is exhausted, that's me. Mark is as exhausted as FMLA, CFRA leave for his knee surgery. He just sent us a doctor's note requesting another month. This isn't me, but I did have a knee surgery earlier in the year. More empathy. We need to hire another employee to do his work and can't wait for him. Can we just end his employment? And oh, by the way, we already hired his replacement.
No, reasonable accommodation.
All right. So the takeaway here is that this happens all the time. You got to move on, right? So you got to do two things. You got to put that person on hold and go through the process and see what comes out when they're ready to return, when they ask to return. Maybe they will be entitled to return, as they often are, maybe they won't. You got to operate your business. So you should try to replace with other workers. You may hire other people. You don't want to be hiring other people and promising them, like in any employment, that they're going to have this job for the rest of their life, because that would be inconsistent with how you normally do it. But you got to operate your business. But there's plenty of times that Mark's going to get to come back to work, and he's going to be entitled to his same or comparable job at the same or comparable compensation. And the person who was hired more recently, you're either going to have a place for them or not. And it's sad sometimes, because sometimes the replacement is 5 times better than the person that went out. It's rough. It's rough. All right, 2 days after Dana got a bad, nobody's had this happen. 2 days after Dana got a bad performance review, she turned in a psychiatrist doctor's note saying that she's unable to work and needs 2 months leave of absence. Okay? This is the one you see, it feels like the employee's playbook. Yeah. I'm about to get fired, I'm going to put up some barriers. And so you got to treat it like the book. Treat it by the book. Brian, because I had to include Brian Latcher's name in here. It's not about him, though. Just returned from medical leave of absence and disputes his PTO bank being docked because he was emailing daily. We talked about this, right? Okay? You could, right?
If he's on leave of absence, though, your company could,
Right. Actually, that's a great point. So if somebody's really on a leave of absence, there's not a business reason for them to be, so it should be an ordinary policy for them to be, their access to the email and the server and the systems to be suspended. Sounds nicer, suspended.
Yes, it does sound nicer.
Yeah. Because some people are going to, some people are out on leave, and sometimes they're pissed off. Because, how come my email doesn't work? So you're on leave. You need the time to recuperate. We really appreciate, you can have this conversation. Say, we really appreciate your care and focus. Tell us what we need to know, and we'll take care of it. This is your time to do this. Now, that's the right thing to do. You also don't want this claim either. All right, this actually happened with a restaurant client of mine a few years back. Kirsten is a bartender in our restaurant. Last Saturday night, she had a seizure in the main dining room, bringing the entire restaurant operations to a halt. And horrifying some of our patrons. Turns out that she had not taken her meds that control the seizures. Fortunately, she was not behind the bar where there is so much glass. So, fancy restaurant, fancy Beverly Hills restaurant, right in the middle of the restaurant. And it just, you can imagine how hard it would be to be a patron and see that happen. And they, there were some in management that just said, one, I don't want to deal with this. Two, it's her fault. She didn't take her meds. And so, cooler heads prevailed. And the documentation was essentially, this is what happened. we have chosen not to terminate your employment at this time because you've put yourself and others at great risk. This is what we require going forward. We want a certification from your physician saying that you are under care and that you are doing the things that the doctor requires to control the situation. And, it's shorthanding it, but it was a way of creating some documentation that says this is where we've been, and you scared the living daylights out of us. And the employee was scared too. So that has happened. What's our time? How many minutes should I go? I'll go 3. How about 3? You okay? 3. Okay. All right. Jim has an important office job in our company. He has migraines, which can come on without much notice. Sometimes he can't work, could only work at home, can only work a partial day. He'd ask for intermittent leave of absence. Whole other topic for intermittent leave of absence. It's very difficult in the migraine area because if it's real, and most people don't say they have migraines unless it is. There are some people who I've seen use that as an excuse, but intermittent leave of absence, be sensitive to that. You'll need some outside help to manage that. It's a way that you could really stub your toe. Last couple. Brent is a marginal 2-year employee who's verbally counseled several times. Things improve for a while and then he slides back to poor performance. Nobody's had that happen here. We're ready to deliver a written performance improvement plan to him, but we just received his medical leave request, right? This happens, right? You're just ready to impose the discipline. So what do you do?
Just wait.
Exactly. Okay. Penny has been on bonding leave for her newborn for a few weeks. We found all kinds of important work she didn't do. We found more problems in her work every day. And since we redistributed her work to more effective personnel, we really don't need her. This happens. It's like the archaeological team goes in, sorts through everything, and said, anywhere from, oh my God, I can't believe what's happened. Some version of that. So what do you do?
Wait it out.
Wait it out.
Set
Right.
a new expectation upon her return.
Right?
Don't counsel her.
Or you hold whatever discipline may be appropriate until she returns. Because you really don't want to, it's unwise to interfere with whatever the leave of absence is, even if there might be some aspects that cost you a little bit of money. Because then you'll always be able to say, we were horrified. We suspended the discipline until this person returns, and then you have to decide whether you want to give that person an opportunity to improve, which is a more conservative approach, reduces the risk of claim, saying here's what we found, you need to change these behaviors, and we're going to talk about this in a month, which she'll find another reason to go on leave maybe. I hope not. Or you might be in a situation that what you found was so significant that you really cannot return them to work, but you've allowed them to have their leave. On occasion, it's so serious that you're going to terminate it because you'd say, we found that there's clear and objective evidence of embezzlement. Something that's, bless you, something material that you've got them cold on, that would be a time that just says, the law doesn't permit people to use crimes and lying and things like that. I had another story. Anyway, we've got a bunch of lawyers all over the country. It's a pleasure meeting you. Let me know if you want the slide.
Montage Insurance. Our mission is to further your mission with dedication, service, and integrity while protecting your assets and giving back to our community.